Jim Tucker is a forester, I think is,
No, I've never had a forestry class in my
but
life.
you have a degree in forestry.
Well, I know.
You have a degree. Anyway, he got his bachelor's and master's and PhD from Colorado State University in forestry. And for those of
Biology, and my mathematics PhD are actually in our son.
But I think for us, those of us who know the NDVI, the Normalized Different Vegetation Index, this is the guy who gave us the NDVI. And today we talked about this going down to NOAA. If you look at on the web between NOAA 6, where the bands are together, and NOAA 7, and he actually went down to NOAA and when he was a postdoc, they called him stupid. But anyway, so he gave us the NDVI, and with the NDVI, I don't need to tell everyone that it transformed the field of ecology to continental scale and global scale, gave us 30-odd years to look at climate sensitivity. And the NDVI has been useful for predicting locust outbursts, Ebola outbursts, Rift Valley fever outbursts, and other diseases and many other applications. So now Jim, in the last several years, when he's sort of gone into hiding, has done something totally new again. And so he'll talk about it, looking at commercial satellite data to tell us the carbon stock of every tree in sub-Saharan Africa, 9.9 billion trees. Here, Jim.
Thanks, Lisa. So I've never had a forestry class. I just happened to be in a department that was affiliated with the School of Forestry. Okay, so a bunch of coworkers and myself recently published a paper in Nature. And we got the cover and also a News and Views article. So I tell people this is a hat trick. It's the only hat trick I've had, although I've had 2 other covers, one in Science. Anyway, neither here nor there. I had a lot of really good coworkers, including Eric Romero, who's sitting right over there. He was one of the kids in the group, and 3 of our group, 6 of our group were former interns or were interns, and then became contract employees. So we had a lot of cheap labor, of intelligent people who wanted to work, and Eric was one of them. So now 3 of them have moved on to working on the PhDs. 1 doubled her salary, went to the Earth Observatory. 1 is still in the group, and the other went to the University of Minnesota for a full-time computer science job. So we all worked together as a group, and we used a huge volume of commercial satellite data to map individual trees and convert them to carbon from 9.5 north to 24 degrees north. So we're south of the Sahara and north of the equator. And we did this with commercial satellite data. So I'm going to go through a 2-slide summary of what we did. So in case you have other trusted engagements or you want to escape, you can. But this is just some. So on the left-hand side are the major components of what we used. A huge volume of satellite data. We used a convolution and neural net code. We used tree training data. Oh, thank you, Nick. Wow. If anyone falls asleep, okay. So when I was in grade school and junior high, teachers could actually go around. Either throw a razor at you and you fall asleep, or whack you with a stick. But fortunately, times have changed. Okay, so these are the components of what we worked on. Let's start with satellite data. We had about 1/3 of a million commercial satellite data images that we got for free from the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. These data are available to anyone who works on a U.S. government project, free of charge. You just have to figure out how to get them and how to use them, store them, and process them. So we formed these into a mosaic. We minimized several sources of variation, and then we ended up with a huge array of 40 trillion array elements, which we processed. So this is why a lot of people don't work over large areas with these data. So these are 50 centimeter data over an area of about 10 million square kilometers. That's the size of Alaska and the continental 48 states combined. We were surprised we finished the project. So then we have our convolution of neural net code. The key here are the hyperparameters. I won't go into that. If they're computer scientists, they get really excited about the hyperparameters, but I'll just go through what we did generally and then show some of the results. So we optimized our code. I have one programmer who matched the code to the machine on which we processed the data. He's a specialist. He got really bored being a supercomputer systems administrator. He said it's driving me crazy. I'd rather work in a project. We're very happy to have it. Now if you use machine learning, the learning means training data. You have to train whatever you're trying to convolve to identify, because convolution identifies boundaries really well. Extremely powerful tool that requires high performance computing. So Martin Brandt heroically selected more than 89,000 individual trees by hand as the training data. Now he burned out doing that, and after our proof of concept paper was published in October 2020, where he was the first author, I was the second author, he then took a well-deserved 5 or 6 month vacation. High performance computing. Fortunately, the Blue Water supercomputer at the University of Illinois, a 13 petaflop machine, 49,000 processors, 26 petabytes of online storage with transfer rates to and from core of more than a terabyte a second. This is where we process our data, and they gave us as much time as we wanted or could use. We used it up, and they said, here's more. It was like being a child and you're having ice cream and you finish it, and people come and say, would you like some more? We said, yes. And so we ran about, for this paper, about 3 million node hours, and each node has 16 processors. So for this paper alone, we burned 50 million core hours on the Blue Water supercomputer. We mapped 10 billion tree crowns, and then we converted those into carbon. And then we converted our tree crowns into carbon using allometry. Some botanists have gone out and measured crown area of trees, cut down the trees, and then dried the wood and branches and weighed it. The same for roots, but not many, only 26. We had about 600 samples here, 26 samples here, and 900 samples here for leaves. Then we go to tree, leaf carbon, tree root carbon, tree wood carbon. And so we have then 10 billion trees. Okay, you put yourself in a box. Is how does anyone use all this data? It's just overwhelming. I mean, it would drive you crazy trying to use it. Although all of our data are at the Oak Ridge National Lab, but we wrote a viewer where you can view the data, and I'll show 1 or 2 examples from tree 1 to tree 10 billion. We also aggregate them to the hectare. You can invoke routines to do this per square kilometer, et cetera. So you end up at the tree level, and here are the same data at the hectare level. So we had all the components in place, and then so this is the second paper we hope in a trilogy. We have our proof of concept paper, Tucker and Brandt. We have our carbon paper, or rather Brandt and Tucker. This is Tucker and Brandt. Now we're ready for a follow-on. 2 dates. We're going to use at least 800,000 images. Okay, what should we get this? Okay, so this is the area where we're working. It's in the Sahelian-Sudanian zone primarily, where there's a marked rainy season of a few months, followed by an extensive dry season. Here are the same trees. This is the dry season. This is the rainy season. So we're trying to map tree crowns. So we use data from November, December, January, February, March, and April. March and April, if we have to. Very little of our data can be used. So I can't resist showing an NDVI profile. And so here's an NDVI profile for Motus. Here are the months. Comes along dry season. Here's the average value. This gray area is the maximum and the minimum for the 20 or 22 years of Motus. So the Motus data are the gold standard, and you can use them to understand areas. But then when things fall off here because it stops raining, and so you have almost no clouds in November, December like this, things dry out. And this is the cell where these data came from. And all this is in our nature. Okay, so believe it or not, this person is me, although 42 years ago, when I started working in subsustainability. And that's when I realized if you want to work in a semi-arid area, do it here because you have a pulse rainy season. You don't have to have data over 5 or 6 months, but you have where rain falls and vegetation grows, even if it's cold. This is a very short time period, growth period, because it is only 15 or 16 degrees north of the equator. Okay, this is one of my graduate students, our graduate students and colleagues with Eric, former intern, Yasmin Fitz. Also, so this is the planet data for individual trees. And these are the planet data for the background. So the point here is you can separate the background from the trees. So what we define as a tree is over here. This is a 35 centimeter worldview 3 image. It's a false color image. So the red color is the NDVI. And then you see the associated tree crown that's in conjunction. You also see it here. You see it here. So our definition of a tree is a green tree crown and an associated shadow. We later modified that to a shadow in the opposite the direction of the incoming flux, because otherwise you could have a shadow on the other side, and those could be bushes. So learn as you grow. So here is a 50 centimeter image from the Maxar data. Ignore this, I have no idea what this means. This must have been a mistake when I was editing things. And so here is the tree crown outlined here. Here's the NDVI, and then here's the panchromatic band, and this whole area over here is the associated crown. Now I'll show a figure of Eric, which he produced. And so here is the tree crown for a tree that has a crown diameter of about 4 meters, a surface area or a tree crown area of 14.75 square meters. And this is the shadow. Here is the tree, and the green line marks what we detected using the neural net. So here's the panchromatic band. It includes the shadow. Here's the NDVI. You notice there's no shadow here. And as for this tree, these are called flying carpet plots. Inez Fung coined that term. So we're big on flying carpet. Okay, this is something Martin Brandt sent me and said, Jim, it looks like we didn't make a mistake here. So here's a tree, and here's the same exact tree in our process data from the neural net. You'll notice we miss all of these areas in here, which are not trees. Okay, so in total, we processed all the data from 9.5 north to 24 north, and we mapped more than 13 billion trees. And we restricted our analysis only down to 1,000 millimeters per year, because that's where our allometry came from to convert the trees into mass and carbon. So over the same area, we also mapped 1.6 bushels, 1.6 billion bushels. And so these had crown areas of 1 square meter to 2 3/4 square meters. And we haven't even looked at these data yet. We hope someone does soon, but at the moment we haven't had time to do that. So we mapped a lot of trees, a lot of bushes, and we focused our attention upon trees in this area down to 1,000 square meters. So one of our definitions to be a tree was a tree had to have at least 3 square meters of area. So this was an easy way of having a threshold to get to not consider at this time bushes and small trees. So uncertainty. First uncertainty we did was we had hand annotations of tree crowns, and then we ran our neural net, and the difference between 6,000 of those was plus or minus 2.5%. So this was the uncertainty for our area mapping of tree crowns. Then we had a assessment, which 6 of us, myself included, took part in, where we looked at errors of omission, where there were trees and the neural net did not identify them as trees, and commission, where the neural net mapped a tree which wasn't a tree. Could have been a bush, it could have been something else. But 4.9%, 2.7%, or almost 651,000 trees. So the net here was plus or minus 2.2%. And then in this, all of us who did this work, including Eric, we then double checked what everyone else in the group had done. So we tried to be very careful. This is one of the images I worked on. And so these are trees. Here's part of the shadow. Here, there was only one error. There was this tree, which was an omitted tree. So we had a score of 67 correctly identified trees and 1 error. So I saw this and I thought, wow, this will be a perfect Christmas card. So this became my Christmas, Hanukkah, winter solstice, Happy New Year card, because the colors are kind of festive. And I sent it to the editors of Nature, and they responded and said, "We've never seen a Christmas card like this." And they probably thought we're dealing with a nutcase. Anyway, so when you work with satellite data, you do all kinds. And so Christmas cards is all one. This is one of the worst areas which we evaluate, where we had a lot of confusion and or bushes confounded us. So here are some trees which were mapped properly. You see, here's the tree, there's the shadow, here and here, and here. The solar flux is coming in like this. And then you have areas like this, and especially over here, where you have shadows in the yellow areas, where you have shadows all around these areas. And so those are bushes. And then we also use Google Earth to zoom in and double check. So here we had 135 trees which were mapped. There were 23 areas. This was one of our worst areas in terms of accuracy. I thought burn scars are going to be a giant pain, but they turned out to be just the opposite, because the burning fire eliminated all the herbaceous vegetation and it killed a lot of the bushes because they burned. And so here, now there's this weird error, this sort of piece of cheese tree, which you know is the tree. We also found trees in the ocean, not many, only a few, which we determined were identified by the neural net as being trees, because the waves were tall, they were white capping, and behind the wave was a shadow, and something about the foam, apparently, and the white cap had a ever so slightly positive NDVI. So we just put a water mask and got rid of all the trees in the ocean. Anyway, so we only had 4 errors here out of 150 trees. So instead of burn scars being a giant pain, we actually looked forward to evaluating them because they had simplified the landscape. Okay, so to summarize what we did, here are the trees on the ground. Here's how the trees look in a panchromatic band. You see the crown and you see their associated shadow, all in the same direction. And then we map them with our neural net, and the colors are 2 class sizes. The blue color is 3 to 15 square meters. The green color is 15 to 50 square meters of ground area. But now we have a lot of data to work with, 10 billion trees. And so one of the questions people ask is, why didn't you use ground data? Well, people that collect ground data don't accurately measure the tree crown. And they just, you can't assume circularity or even an ellipse. And so these are different. So this area is the same in this ellipse and these circles, 16% air, 16% air, 15% air. So this is why we can't use ground data, because people almost never estimate the crown area correctly and how it deviates from circularity or being ellipsoid in shape. Here's our llama tree. 600 samples, 26 samples, 900 samples. And here's how this 26 samples are collected. So here are people picking up a tree. They measure the crown area. They then weigh the tree and the branches. They strip off all the leaves and weigh them. And then they dig out, in this case, a taproot down to here. This is why we only have 26 samples. So if anyone wants to volunteer to work on this team, I'll let Pierre or No personally charge of our allometry, in case you might be interested. Okay, so our total uncertainty, we have a crown area error, we have an omission commission error. So you take so we assume independence of all errors. So our mapping error is plus or minus 3.3%. Our allometry area error is 19.5%. So you add these things together and you have an uncertainty of plus or minus 20%. So when I submitted the paper to Nature in December of 2021, the senior editor, Julianne Mossinger, responded almost immediately and said, your uncertainty analysis is deficient. So we developed 2 uncertainty analyses. One was a Monte Carlo method, which we thought was really cool, because we have a sample size of 10 billion. And then we went with a more conservative, independent assessment like this, holding in reserve our Monte Carlo analysis in case the reviewer said it wasn't sufficient, we could immediately not waste more time in the review process. But we haven't had to use it. Okay, we have 10 billion trees, we've converted them into carbon, then you can form figures like this. Here's a figure of its rainfall of the megagrams of carbon per hectare, wood, roots, and leaves. And then this is an interesting plot. This is the average tree carbon density here. These are the quartiles either way as a function of rainfall. So you multiply this value times 1,000 and you get the kilograms of carbon in an individual tree. So then you can do things like generalize. You have a sample of 10 billion. So here is the tree probability distribution function for the 4 zones we worked in. This is the subhumid, this is the semi-arid, arid, and hyper-arid. These are the areas of these. And so we mapped 90% of our trees and 30% of our areas. We don't know why there was this decrease here. People have said land use and cover changes. We're investigating that now. And then here are the cumulative distribution functions of trees as a function of tree crown area, and the carbon in the tree crowns, also a cumulative distribution function in the here. So you see that a lot of small trees are really important. So we get up to this point where you're dealing with a diameter of 8 meters. And so more than 50% of the carbon is in trees of that diameter and smaller, and probably almost 60% of all trees. So spatial resolution is really important in semi-arid. Okay, now we compare our data to other sources of published information, and basically nothing compared. Those data sets which compared in terms of average values, when you look at the spatial coherence, they did not compare. So here are 6 other studies in the same area. This is plus or minus what we measured. Here is plus or minus 1 standard deviation. Our values are here. So even so, the green curve corresponded to our plus or minus 1 standard deviation range. And this Nile-Hannon curve here in this area, we still found little correspondence between our data sets. Here is the above ground carbon fraction. So we're on the low side. And again, this is plus or minus 20%. So these are some of the plots you make when you have a huge sample size. I mean, if anyone can interpret these, then we'll give you a contract, because you have these blizzards of points. And so it's basically meaningless. So you know, here you underestimate, here you overestimate, and underestimate again. But you really can't use a plot like this for anything definitive. I mean, perhaps you have interpretive skills, but I don't really judge. Okay, so then we also looked at numerical simulation models. So here's the previous figure, which we compared to these observations. Here we compared our data to these 6 trendy models, because the trendy models all use the same input data, or at least a similar approach, even though they use different estimates of fractional tree cover in the semi-arid zone. So you notice they're all over the place. This area, this gray area is plus or minus 1 standard deviation of the trendy models. So the numerical simulation models do worse than the observations. And the reason they do is all of these 9 trendy models, these are their assumptions in terms of the forest area and the semi-arid area. So they're all over the place. So now, one of them could be right, we could be wrong along with everyone else. But so at this point, at least we can say, we did this, we're making comparisons, and now we can go from there. Okay, so here you can look at these plots. This is the last figure in our paper. Here's our data here. And we show a lot of carbon here, different here, different here. Maybe it's also different here and also different here. There are other areas. So not only do we compare things in the mean, but we also compare things spatially. We find no correspondence in the spatial comparison. So we mapped tree crowns. We went to tree carbon, we went to carbon per hectare, and then we combined all these. If you go to our data at the Oak Ridge National Lab, they have all of the output data, and they also have the data by hectare and square kilometer. We looked at one area to show the potential. This is sort of a teaser, so people would say, hey, we should fund these people again to use more data to look before and after. 2002, 2021, carbon in trees, carbon per hectare. So you see in this area, the total carbon has gone from 6 megagrams of carbon per hectare to 10 megagrams per hectare. Okay, our data, this was all the input data which we started with from 2002 to 2020 because we got the data for free. The National Geospatial Intelligence Agency purchased these data from Digital Globe, now Maxar, and we were able to tap in and get all the data. I have no idea what the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency purchased the data from. It's a classified number, I think, because they do classified work. So then we down selected 19 million square kilometers to 10 million square kilometers by a set of decision rules. We did this to maximize data in November, December, and January, the early dry season. Okay, so we then so when you publish a paper like this, you get worried. Okay, so the paper was submitted in December of 2021. We didn't hear it was accepted until December of 2022. So we started checking everything. So if you make a mistake, it's always good that you identify it before someone else points it out, because that's embarrassing. And your coworkers might make fun of you. So one of the things we did was we compared all of our input data in terms of cloud cover to the Maxar data. And we found the Maxar cloud cover fraction is just wrong. Here are our data. We did this by comparison to same day, same area MODIS cloud cover. Then we also looked at the aerosol optical depth for MODIS. And here is that curve. We were able to get values for 92% of our data. So then several of us, myself included, three of us worked on the cloud cover. And then we used the MODIS optical depth at 0.6 to map all of these areas where there were potentially clouds and/or aerosols. Then we looked at the neural net results. We also found that 1% of our data didn't process for peculiarities of the input data. However, we mapped in the aerosol and cloud areas almost 700 million trees. So we were encouraged. So the power of convolution is high, and we had really good training data. So that was well within the uncertainty. Okay, here's a high aerosol optical depth. This is Pierre and Noah and two of our African coworkers who are co-authors on our paper. And Harmattan, this is a very high optical depth in this area. Then here are all the people who worked on the paper. And we told everyone, Shane Lofter wrote the viewer, which I'll show some examples of. We put ourselves in a box because how do you use 10 billion tree data? So we had to write a viewer. This is available to anyone to use over the web. So if you're suffering from insomnia, you can explore around and see a lot of trees in a lot of places. Anyway, so here's Devin Fox with her favorite camel. And then there are other people with their dogs, Eric with his dog. And this here is Lori Perkins with her favorite animal. I have no idea what its name is. So we had a good time. We all remained as friends. And it took us a while to get this done, but we finally succeeded. And I breathed a sense of relief. And my wife told me I don't have to divorce you. So that was a major accomplishment. Okay, so then we have the viewer. I'll just show some examples of that and answer questions. On our viewer, you can't use Internet Explorer. So now we're gonna look inside this red box, which is from the Air Mountains of Niger. So here's the same area. We're looking at the tree carbon density here. And with our viewer, there's always a URL associated with where you are. If you save that URL, you will go back to exactly that location. Exactly that location. So now this is a blow up. Here you see this area. There were 3 separate Maxar images from December of 2016, December 2014, and December 2015, January of 2015. But you'll notice that things are spatially continuous across image lines. We spent a hell of a lot of time making sure that we had the best co-registered data. And this wasn't selected because things matched. I didn't even check that. And so now I'm going to zoom up on the red box area. Now we're zooming up. Now we start to see individual trees. Now you really see them as we zoom up. Now I'm going to change to the satellite view, and you put them in the context of the background with map box. So you see how the tree crowns, I used to have dreams of green blobs. When we were working on this, and my wife said, I don't believe you, but this is what I saw. Anyway, and so now let's go inside that red box. And so here, you can click on individual trees and you get this information, where you are, what the area crown area was, what the NDVI was. Here's the source image. And here you have leaf, wood, and root carbon, some here. And here is the all-important URL to take you back to this location should you need to go there. Now, just to show you what the images look like. One last image. So if you click on one of the digital globe images used, here it is right here. Now you can blow this up. This is just a quick look image from digital globe, or rather Maxar. So that's what we did. It was a lot of fun. I wondered many times if the paper was ever going to be published. You always worry about things that haven't happened on a big paper, and you don't want to be embarrassed. And so you work on this and you work on that. And after a while, you finally have to say, well, we've checked everything. Let's just publish it and see what happens. So thank you very much. And pleasure being back in Berkeley. And thanks for your attention.
Another NASA achievement. Questions?
And that was really impressive and really beautiful to see so much of that imagery and all those spatially expensive references. The question I have is about the value that we get from doing things spatially expensively over the entire region. I was struck at the beginning by the, I think it was about 3 million core hours of compute time required to do this. And translating that into energy, that's a substantial number of kilowatt hours. And many of the inferences you make at the end, I think, can be done through randomly subsampling tiles, or could be with bigger error estimates on them. But it's pretty cool to get the whole map. And I just wondered if you could comment a little bit on the sort of energy trade-off versus knowledge trade-off to get a project like this.
Well, I hope next time we can run on Amazon Web Services hydro-powered supercomputer on somewhere along the Columbia River near Washington. That's true. It did take a lot of kilowatt hours to run these waters. It's an older machine that's not very efficient. What we wanted to do was see if we couldn't do this in a spatially continuous fashion. We had to use data which were not spatially continuous in time, even by year, but we showed this could be done and how to do it. Now, of course, we also know with GPUs that you can speed up the processing, probably by 100 to 150 times. But Blue Waters had 49,000 processors, and so it only represents a slight advantage. Probably instead of 50 or 100 million core hours, the GPUs it might take 2 or 3, maybe 5 or 6, 5 or 10 million. Anyway, so we didn't consider the energy used on this. We felt that we didn't use the time someone else would. As an actualization, Well, we want to do that especially in this way, and then you can sample the data in various ways to see what sort of, of subsetting or subsetting that could be used in the future. I have no idea what that would be. So all of our data are available for people to look at. Now we're just about to start work on a circumpolar tundra processing. We're just now organizing the data. If there's anyone here at UC Berkeley is interested in the tundra, get in touch with me because we might have an internship for you in the summer. We're just now organizing the data, using data from June, July, and August, the same number of years. We're now downloading all the data. We're working on our training data with our colleagues at the University of Copenhagen. And that'll be the next thing we do. And we will do this in 2 dimensions first, and then we'll add a 3rd dimension from the Arctic dam at a 2-meter XY spatial. So this is the tool which can be used to look at different areas of interest at the hyperspatial scale, not hyperspectral, but hyperspatial scale. And then you can aggregate them. So I've ignored your question about how much energy we burn. There was a lot. But I hope to run next time an enzyme of services on that hydro-powered, carbon-neutral supercomputer center.
Anybody else?
Do you think you would be able to use either a part or maybe the entirety of the original training data while training the model for the new area of study, or will the process of producing the training data have to start from scratch?
Well, we actually used our sub-Saharan Africa training data on some of the tundra data. And we did okay, but we missed a lot of tricks. So in the tundra, you have fantastic shadows because the sun angle is so. And you can even tell whether it's a conifer tree or something else, but they're almost all conifer trees. So we think in the tundra, we'll have to emphasize the shadow, and the NDVI will be minuscule or much smaller. So we tried it, we had about a 60% success rate. But we want to get up above north, because we're the far north of 95 degrees, 95% accuracy.
In the back, in the red shirt.
Thank you so much for this great talk. I totally read up we were in math individual trees. You know, we have so many applications for all sorts of ecological questions. So what I understand, one of the key aspects of this method to work in this landscape was the contrast between the soil and the tree color and the shade, right? So how far do you think we are from being able to do this in, like, say, the Amazon, the space is flooded, the soils are darker?
Okay, where you have a closed canopy forest, we can map individual tree groups. And then you can use LiDAR data, say from JEDI, to tell at a 25 meter spatial resolution where the ground area or the floor is. So that can be used, but you can do this on the basis of tree crowns as well as the JEDI data within that 25 meter spatial resolution of JEDI. So we haven't done that yet. We've done it for a few small areas where next to the Goddard Space Flight Center, which the Goddard Space Flight Center wanted to sell to a developer. And so we got busy and said, no, we're going to block this. And so we mapped in what's called Area 400, I think about 6,000 tree crowns, converted them into carbon. And we were able to convince the Goddard Space Flight Center that this plot should be donated to the Patuxent Wildlife Refuge. And we've done the same thing next to Bowie State University. We wanted to sell a lot of trees there, or forested areas, because someone said, well, you should really give this to the local Indian tribes. Well, you perhaps should. They would put in a casino and this would be terrible. So, so far we've resisted that as well. But so this tool can be used also in the Amazon, it can be used elsewhere where you have closed canopy forests, or closed canopy bush areas. But we haven't done it. So we're hoping other people will, and, I've been talking with Dennis Baldacci about one or two projects where we'll get some commercial satellite data of areas of interest, form them into a mosaic, and then, provide those to Dennis and his group for the training data. They can deal with our colleagues in Copenhagen, who are the training data experts. Martin Brandt has recovered from his previous, training data induced psychosis. I'm just joking. But, anyway, so there are all kinds of things which can be done, and having, students and graduate students and postdocs and faculty working on this is the way to expand this and find some things that are really useful and can contribute. And Eric's here too.
So question in front, you asked a question?
Oh, it was kind of related. I was just curious how you separate, if two tree crowns overlap, how you're separating it.
Well, I could feel like your sellers and say carefully. But, so what we do, because we know in some places you have that. So we attempt to use slight gaps and give them a higher weight in our neural net processing. Because we have some really big tree crowns, which we know are impossible. And so we break those up into smaller tree crowns. Because in a semi-arid area, having a tree crown of 300 or 400 square meters, no one's ever seen a tree. So for big tree crowns like that, we disaggregate into smaller tree crowns by giving higher weight in the neural net processing to gaps and indications where different tree crowns are. It's a problem, we're working on it, and we haven't perfected it, but we're working on it. And that's a big problem, and it's something which we're working.
Is that the same method that you use for a closed canopy?
I beg your pardon?
Is that the same method that you use for a closed canopy?
It's very similar.
Other questions?
I have a question, maybe a little bit related to this main topic, but related to the field work. You mentioned like the people who did the field work, they cannot directly measure the tree crown area. But I was wondering if you could do or they could do a similar way, like they along a tree, they measure the trunk size and do something and map the trunk size to the tree crown area and double check across exactly.
Well, what foresters do, I'm told, well, not foresters, is that they always record the trunk diameter at rest height or 4.5 feet. 4.5 feet. Thank you. But that's something which we cannot sense when we have a tree crown. And so this is why we base everything on tree crown area. And if we have height would be great, but we don't have it, so we use allometry. But if we had height from any other source, we would use it.
You can fly drones now. So you don't have to stop, right?
Well, so they say.
It's a lot of drones.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of drone. And
But
then,
your study plot, you can fly drones.
oh, and if it's a small study area, that's a great thing. Because you can map the crown, and you can also tell how tall they are.
I have a question. Because you show the modeling data, the modeling is as good as the data, so I'm not surprised that the modeling numbers are totally different from what you measured. But what I'm surprised by is when you saw Stefan Sachi's data, right? That's LiDAR data. Stefan's data, when you compare the biomass, the carbon stock.
No,
Stefan's data is LiDAR, right? So you
no,
actually.
no, it's not LiDAR.
Oh,
It's radar.
sorry.
Microwave radar.
Yeah.
Oh,
I think he used the passive microwave.
okay, so the footprint is much larger.
Yes.
But maybe a related question, one of the biggest challenges of Earth system modeling is to get photosynthesis right. And to calculate
Carbon stack.
photosynthesis and light interception. And most models assume Beer's law, very simple cases, but savannas are very open. And so I guess my question is the first system colleagues actually using these data to improve their radiation transfer models to improve photosynthesis at all? Or they haven't done that far yet?
I've heard one or two people talk about it, but I don't know if anyone's done it. Joanna Joyner and I hope to look at carbon residence time in savanna systems because we know what the tree cover is. We may be brave and try and use the bush cover data too, and then the rest will be herbaceous. So perhaps something like that could be done. Maybe someone's already doing it. But this is the first start in measuring all the trees. So all of our data is at the Oak Ridge National DAC, and it can be accessed. And all of our allometry is there too. It has the species. So we combine species for allometry. And we have 26 different species of trees. But the area on the south side of the Sahara is very homogeneous with respect to tree species because it's a highly seasonal area, so the diversity is low. And it's the same climate. It's the monsoonal rainy season, dry season. So we're fortunate there. When we started moving further to the east, we thought we might encounter a different mix of tree species. And what you do is you then run your neural net with your training data, and then you extend that where you find areas that don't map. You produce other training data. So we have Martin Brandt ready to jump back into action, but it wasn't necessary. And so he didn't really saw it related. So we use the training data from West Africa all the way across. Yes, sir.
Do you have any plans to develop additional models like for various biomes, like if you move, when you're moving to the Arctic? And then if you move even to like a different semi-arid region of the world, the American Southwest, for example.
Well, you reach a point of exhaustion, right? You know, you're partner. And so you want to do 2 or 3 things, maybe 1 or 2 things and do them well. So we're working on the Navajo Nation. So that's really interesting. We may be working in Arizona, New Mexico, northern Mexico for a possible NASA field program called ERID, about arid and younger lands. And also that includes California and Nevada, and maybe extends off into Nevada and later mountain. The Australians are interested in the project, but we have all the data, but I think we're going to go for the tundra first because of its critical importance. So
Hire more interns for new models.
yes,
Okay, well, let's thank Jim again.
thanks.